The piano in the corner of the small living room was old, scratched, and missing 3 keys. It looked like something that should have been thrown away years ago, but to Elena, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. Her father had found it at a second-hand store in the city, where old instruments were sold for the price of scrap. He had come home one evening with a wide grin, his hands covered in dust, and said, "It's not much, but maybe it'll make music again in your hands." Elena was only 12 at the time. She still remembered how she had rushed to touch the keys, pressing one after another, surprised when some worked and some didn't. When a few keys made no sound, she laughed softly and said, "That's okay. I'll imagine the missing ones." Her mother had smiled at that, shaking her head as if she didn't quite believe Elena could really learn to play it. But Elena didn't care. The moment she touched that broken piano, something inside her lit up. Every day after school, she would sit by the window, trying to copy tunes she heard on the radio. She didn't know how to read notes, didn't have any lessons, and didn't even know the names of most of the keys. Still, she played. She played until her fingers hurt, until her eyes grew heavy, and until her father would gently call from the kitchen, "That's enough for today, little one." The neighbors didn't always like it. Their houses were close together, and sound traveled easily through the thin walls. Sometimes, when Elena was practicing late, someone would bang on the wall or shout from the next house, "Enough noise. You can't even play properly." She would stop for a few seconds, her hands frozen above the keys, her chest heavy. Then she would whisper to herself, "They just don't understand yet," and continue softly, barely pressing the keys so no one could hear, except her. At school, she wasn't known for much. She was quiet, shy, and usually sat at the back of the classroom. When the music teacher asked if anyone could play an instrument, she raised her hand once, but the teacher only smiled politely and said, "Oh, that's nice. Elena, maybe next time we'll have you try something easy, like the tambourine." It stung a little. She didn't say anything back, but that night she played even longer. She imagined a world where she wasn't just the shy girl in the corner, but someone who could fill a room with music. Her father tried to fix the broken piano keys using tape, bits of cardboard, and glue. Sometimes it worked for a few days, sometimes it didn't, but Elena didn't mind. She said the missing notes taught her imagination. "If I can hear them in my head," she told her father, "I don't need the sound." The small living room became her stage. When the evening sun came through the dusty curtains, it looked almost like a spotlight. Her younger brother would sit on the floor and clap after every song, even if it didn't sound right. He would grin and say, "You'll be famous one day, you'll see." Elena would just laugh. "Famous people have real pianos," she'd reply, still smiling. Her parents didn't have much money. Her father worked long hours at a nearby factory, and her mother took sewing jobs from neighbors to help with bills. They couldn't afford lessons or new instruments. Still, every time they saw her play, something softened in their eyes, a quiet pride they couldn't quite put into words. But not everyone saw her that way. One afternoon, during a family gathering, her uncle laughed when he saw her sitting at the piano. "You think you'll become a musician with that thing?" he said. "That piano's older than your father. You should be studying, not wasting time on broken dreams." Elena's hands froze for a moment. She wanted to answer, but she stayed quiet. Her mother, standing nearby, frowned and said softly, "Let her play. It makes her happy." The uncle only shrugged and muttered something about daydreamers. That night, Elena played longer than ever. Her fingers danced across the broken keys, filling the silence with uneven sounds, but somehow it felt right. The air around her seemed to listen. She closed her eyes, imagining herself on a grand stage, with a shining piano in front of her and an audience that didn't laugh. In those moments, she forgot everything else, the small house, the broken keys, the doubts. It was just her and the music. She began learning from whatever she could find. The local library had an old torn book called Learn Piano in 30 Days. She borrowed it so many times the librarian finally said, "You might as well keep it." Elena studied every page, tracing the notes with her fingers, trying to memorize them. She watched free online videos on her old phone, squinting at the tiny screen, pausing every few seconds to copy what she saw. At first it sounded terrible. The timing was off, the rhythm uneven. But little by little, something began to change. Her playing became smoother. Her hands moved with more confidence. She learned how to play short songs, simple ones but beautiful in their own way. Then came the local talent show. It wasn't anything big, just a small community event held in the town hall every year. People performed dances, comedy acts, or sang karaoke songs. Elena's best friend convinced her to sign up. "You have to," her friend said. "You're always talking about playing. Now's your chance." Elena hesitated. "But what if they laugh?" "Then you play louder," her friend said with a smile. So she signed up. On the day of the show, her father helped her carry the old keyboard to the stage. Its paint was chipped, one leg was uneven, and it made a faint buzz when plugged in. But to Elena, it was her treasure. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage, her hands shaking. The audience was small, mostly neighbors and families, but she could feel their eyes on her. Someone whispered, "That's the girl who always plays that old piano." And another chuckled softly. Elena took a deep breath. For a second, she almost turned back. But then she saw her father smiling from the front row, nodding gently as if to say, "You can do this." She sat down, adjusted the stool, and placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment there was silence. Then she began to play. It was a simple tune she had practiced for months, a melody she had written herself, inspired by the sound of rain hitting the tin roof at night. It wasn't perfect. A few notes came out too soft, a few too sharp, but there was something in it that made people stop whispering. When she finished, there was a pause. For a heartbeat, no one said a word. Then someone started clapping, then another, and soon the whole room was applauding. Elena smiled shyly and stood up. Her face was red, her heart pounding, but for the first time she felt seen. After the show, a man from the audience approached her. He introduced himself as a music teacher from a nearby town. "You have something rare," he told her. "Not just talent, but heart. Keep playing. Don't let anyone make you stop." That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing the words over and over. "You have something rare." Maybe he was right. Maybe her broken piano wasn't a burden. It was her beginning. From that day on, she practiced harder than ever. Every note became a promise. Every mistake became a lesson. She still faced laughter, still heard people say she would never go far. But deep down, Elena knew something they didn't. She wasn't just learning to play music. She was learning to believe in herself. And though no one else believed she could play, her heart already knew. One day the world would have to listen. After that small-town talent show, everything felt different for Elena. People who had never paid attention to her before now stopped her on the street to say, "I saw you play last night. That was beautiful." Even the same neighbors who once banged on the walls now smiled when they passed her house and said, "We heard you practicing again. Keep it up." For a few weeks, she walked on air. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she could really become a musician. But life had a way of testing dreams. The excitement faded, and reality returned. The broken piano was still the same. It was getting worse. More keys had stopped working, and sometimes it wouldn't even make sound at all. Her father promised to fix it, but he was working double shifts at the factory and rarely had time. One evening, when she pressed a key and nothing happened, she stared at it and felt tears in her eyes. "Why can't anything just work?" she whispered. Her mother came over, wiping her hands on her apron. "You'll figure it out, my girl. You always do." Elena smiled weakly, but deep down she felt something heavy growing inside. A quiet fear that maybe everyone was right. Maybe she wasn't meant for music after all. Still, she didn't give up. She started visiting the community center, where there was an old upright piano used for children's lessons. She asked if she could practice there after hours. The caretaker, an older woman named Mrs. D'Souza, agreed on one condition. Elena had to help clean the hall when she finished. That was a deal she happily accepted. Every evening after school, she'd walk there with her backpack, practice for 2 hours, then sweep the floors before heading home. One night, while she was playing, she didn't notice someone standing at the door. When she finished, the person clapped softly. It was the music teacher who had once told her to play the tambourine. He smiled and said, "I didn't know you were this good." Elena didn't know how to respond. She just looked down and said quietly, "I've been practicing." He nodded. "Keep going," he said, and left. It was only a few words, but for her, It felt like a mountain had shifted. Months passed. Her school grades stayed good, but music was what she lived for. She read about famous composers and pianists, people who had trained in big cities who had real teachers and expensive instruments. Sometimes she wondered how she could ever compete with them. Then one morning she saw a poster on the school bulletin board. It said, "Riverside Conservatory Annual Youth Auditions. Open competition for all musicians under 18. Elena froze in front of it. She had heard of Riverside. It was one of the most respected music schools in the country. People came from faraway cities just to get a chance to study there. Her heart started to race. For a few seconds, she imagined herself walking into their grand hall, sitting at a shining piano and playing in front of real musicians. But then another thought hit her. What if they laughed? What if she wasn't good enough? That night she brought it up at dinner. "There's a competition at the conservatory next month," she said softly. "It's open to everyone. I want to try." Her mother looked surprised. "Riverside? That's very far, isn't it?" 2 hours by train, her father said. "It's expensive, Elena. The entry fee alone must be—" "It's free," she interrupted. "Anyone can apply online." Her parents exchanged glances. Finally, her father sighed. "If it's free, then why not? You've worked hard. You should try." Her mother smiled, though a little sadly. "Just remember, not everyone gets in. Don't be disappointed if it doesn't work out." "I won't," Elena said, but inside she was already imagining the stage, the lights and the sound of applause. For the next month, she practiced every single day. She played until her fingers ached. She watched recordings of great pianists online, studying their movements. Sometimes, when the internet connection failed, she closed her eyes and imagined the music instead. She borrowed her friend's old upright piano to practice since her own had finally stopped working completely. The instrument was slightly out of tune, but she didn't care. The week before the audition, she couldn't sleep properly. Her thoughts were full of what-ifs. What if her hands froze? What if she forgot the notes? What if everyone else was better? The morning of the audition arrived. It was raining lightly. Her father accompanied her to the city by train, holding her small bag that contained sheet music, a water bottle, and a lucky handkerchief her mother had given her. When they reached the conservatory, Elena's breath caught. The building was enormous, with tall glass windows and grand staircases. She could hear music echoing from different rooms, violins, cellos, pianos, even choirs. Everyone there looked confident, dressed neatly, carrying expensive instrument cases. Elena felt out of place in her old sweater and worn shoes. She whispered to her father, "Maybe I shouldn't have come." He placed his hand on her shoulder. "You belong here as much as anyone," he said gently. "You just need to let them hear you." She nodded, though her heart was racing so fast it hurt. Inside the audition hall, dozens of young musicians waited. Some were warming up, their fingers flying across the keys with ease. A few whispered among themselves when they saw Elena sitting quietly in the corner. "Who's she?" someone asked. "Never seen her before," another replied. "Probably from some small town." Elena pretended not to hear. She held her music sheets tightly, her palms sweating. When her name was finally called, she walked onto the stage, her legs trembling. The judges sat behind a long table, silent and serious. Among them was a man she recognized instantly, the famous Maestro Reinhardt, a conductor whose name was known everywhere. Elena's mouth went dry. She bowed slightly, then sat at the piano. The instrument was beautiful, shiny, smooth, and perfect. Her reflection stared back from its surface. She placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, her fingers wouldn't move. Then she remembered her father's words. "You belong here." She took a deep breath and began to play. At first, her nerves showed. A few notes came out shaky. But as the melody unfolded, she forgot where she was. The sound filled the hall, soft, pure, full of emotion. It wasn't just skill. It was heart. She wasn't playing for the judges anymore. She was playing for her old piano, for the nights she practiced until midnight, for her parents who believed even when no one else did. When the final note faded, she looked up. The hall was silent. No one moved. For a moment she feared she had done something wrong. Then she saw Maestro Reinhardt slowly stand from his chair. His eyes were wide, not in criticism but in awe. He didn't clap. He simply nodded, a small but powerful gesture. "Thank you," he said quietly. Elena bowed again, trying not to cry, and walked off stage. Her legs felt weak, her heart full. Outside, her father was waiting. "How did it go?" he asked. She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "I don't know," she whispered, "but I think they listened." On the train ride home, she sat by the window, replaying the moment again and again, the way the maestro had looked at her, the silence after her last note. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew she had given everything she had. A week later, a letter arrived. The envelope had the logo of Riverside Conservatory printed in gold. Her hands shook as she opened it. Her mother read the letter aloud, her voice trembling. "Dear Miss Morales, we are pleased to inform you that your audition left a lasting impression on our panel. You are invited to study under the personal mentorship of Maestro Julian Reinhardt." For a few seconds, no one said a word. Then her father let out a laugh of disbelief. "You did it, my girl," he said, pulling her into a hug. Elena stood frozen, holding the letter against her chest. She could hardly believe it was real. She looked at her old piano in the corner, dusty, broken, silent. A soft smile spread across her face. "You heard me, didn't you?" she whispered. And though the room was quiet, she could almost hear a faint note echoing back, as if the piano itself was saying, "I told you they would listen." When the letter from the conservatory came, Elena felt like her whole world had changed overnight. For days she kept reading it again and again, as if afraid the words might disappear. "You are invited to study under the personal mentorship of Maestro Julian Reinhardt." It sounded like something from a dream, the kind of thing that happened to other people, not to a girl who had learned piano on a broken instrument in a small house. Her parents couldn't stop smiling. Her father told everyone at the factory, "My daughter's going to the Riverside Conservatory," he said proudly. Even the neighbors who used to complain about her piano practice now congratulated her. "We always knew she'd go far," they said, even though Elena remembered clearly that they hadn't believed in her at all. Still, she didn't hold it against them. She was too happy. A week later, she packed a small suitcase and took the train back to the city. Her mother cried quietly at the station, holding her tight. "Stay true to yourself, my girl," she said. "Don't let big people make you feel small." Her father hugged her too. "Make them listen," he whispered with a grin. The conservatory was like another world. The building was huge, with marble floors, glass walls, and rooms that echoed with music. Students walked through the halls carrying violins, flutes, and books of sheet music. Everyone seemed confident and talented. Elena felt nervous walking in with her worn-out shoes and second-hand clothes. Her heart beat fast when she saw Maestro Reinhardt for the first time in person. He was standing in a rehearsal hall, tall and calm, his gray hair shining under the light. When he saw her, he smiled warmly. "Ah, Miss Morales," he said. "I was hoping you would accept my invitation." Elena bowed slightly, unsure what to say. "Thank you, Maestro. I still can't believe this is real," he chuckled softly. "It's very real. Now let's see what you can do when the world gives you a piano that works." He led her into a quiet practice room. In the center stood a grand piano, shiny, smooth, and perfect. Elena stood in front of it, her fingers trembling. She had never touched a piano like this before. "Go ahead," the maestro said. "Play something. Anything you wish." Elena took a deep breath, sat down, and started to play a melody she had written herself years ago, the one she had played at her first talent show. The sound was so pure that she almost stopped in surprise. Every note came alive. She could feel the vibration through her fingers, through her whole body. When she finished, the maestro clapped softly. "You play with honesty," he said. "Technique can be taught, but heart cannot. And you, my dear, have heart." Those words made her eyes fill with tears. From that day on, her real training began. Every morning she attended classes in music theory, sight reading, and composition. In the afternoons, she had private lessons with Maestro Reinhardt. He was strict but never unkind. He didn't shout or scold. He simply watched and corrected her gently when needed. "You rush here," he'd say, pointing at a note. "Don't chase the music. Let it breathe." At first, Elena struggled. The other students had been learning with professionals for years. They could read difficult scores easily, while she sometimes got lost in the middle. A few of them whispered about her when they thought she couldn't hear. "She's the small-town girl who got lucky," one said. "Maybe the maestro just felt sorry for her." Another added, "Those words hurt. Sometimes she'd go back to her dorm room and cry quietly at night, feeling like she didn't belong. But every time she sat down at the piano, all the noise around her disappeared. The keys were her only friends who never judged her. The maestro noticed her determination. One afternoon after a long practice, he said, "Do you know why I chose you?" She shook her head. "Because when you play," he said, "you remind me of why I fell in love with music in the first place. You play like someone who has lived every note." That moment stayed with her forever. Slowly, her confidence grew. She practiced longer hours than anyone else. When the other students left to relax or chat, she stayed behind, repeating difficult passages again and again until her fingers moved naturally. One evening, as she was practicing alone, she noticed the maestro standing quietly by the door listening. When she stopped, he said, "Do you realize you played that piece with no mistakes tonight?" Elena smiled shyly. "I didn't even notice." "That's the best kind of playing," he said. "When you stop thinking and start feeling." As weeks turned into months, her skills improved more than she could ever have imagined. She learned not just how to play, but how to express emotion through every sound: happiness, sadness, longing, hope. The maestro began giving her opportunities to perform in small gatherings and student concerts. Each time she grew more comfortable on stage. The same shy girl who once trembled at the town hall now played confidently before audiences who listened in silence. But success didn't come without struggles. There were days when her fingers cramped, when nothing sounded right, when exhaustion made her want to quit. There were also moments when she doubted herself again, especially when she saw other students receiving praise or awards. Once, after a difficult rehearsal, she broke down in front of the maestro. "Maybe I'm not good enough," she said. "Everyone here is better than me. They've trained since they were children." The maestro looked at her for a moment, then said softly, "Do you know what's stronger than talent? Persistence. Talent gives up when things get hard. Persistence does not. And you, Elena, have that rare strength." Those words lifted her again. Every night after that, she practiced not just for perfection, but for the love of music itself. She remembered the broken piano at home, the nights she played in the dark, the belief her parents had in her. That memory became her power. One winter evening, Maestro Reinhardt called her into his office. On his desk was a letter. "There is a concert coming up at the National Philharmonic Hall," he said. "It's a special performance, a collaboration between the conservatory's best students and the professional orchestra." "I want you to play." Elena's eyes widened. "Me?" she asked in disbelief. He smiled. "Yes, you. You've earned it." Her heart raced. The Philharmonic Hall was one of the most famous venues in the country. The thought of playing there in front of hundreds of people made her both excited and terrified. That night she called her parents. "Maestro wants me to play at the National Hall," she said breathlessly. There was silence on the line. Then her father's voice came through, full of pride. "You see, I told you one day the world would hear you." The weeks leading up to the concert were the hardest of her life. She practiced more than ever, repeating every note until it was perfect. Sometimes her hands ached so badly she had to soak them in warm water before bed. But she didn't complain. The maestro visited her during rehearsals, offering quiet guidance. "Remember," he said, "don't try to impress anyone. Just tell your story through the keys." The night before the concert, Elena sat alone at the piano in the empty hall, playing softly under the dim lights. She thought of everything: the old piano, her parents, the laughter, the tears, the long train rides, and the moments of doubt. When she finished, she whispered to herself, "This is for them." The next evening, as she stood backstage listening to the audience settling into their seats, her hands trembled again, just like the first time she ever played in front of people. But this time she wasn't afraid. She smiled, took a deep breath, and walked toward the light. The maestro gave her a reassuring nod as she took her place by the grand piano. She sat down, closed her eyes for a brief second, and began to play. The music that came out was more than sound. It was her life, her struggle, her hope, and her love, all woven together. By the time she struck the final note, the entire hall was silent. Then slowly, people began to rise to their feet. The applause grew louder, echoing through the grand hall like thunder. The maestro stood beside her, his eyes filled with pride. For the first time, Elena felt she truly belonged. And though she had once been the girl no one believed in, tonight she was the girl whose music made the maestro stand in awe. After that night at the National Philharmonic Hall, Elena's life changed in ways she never imagined. The sound of applause still echoed in her mind for days. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see the audience standing, clapping, and the maestro's proud smile beside her. It felt like a dream, but this time it was real. The next morning, the conservatory was buzzing with whispers. Everyone was talking about the girl from the small town whose music had touched the maestro himself. Some students who had once ignored her now greeted her with smiles and small compliments. "You played beautifully," one said. "You deserve that stage," another added. Elena smiled politely, but deep inside she stayed humble. She knew where she came from, and she knew how hard the road had been. The maestro called her into his office that same day. His desk was full of letters and programs from the concert. "You did well," he said simply, his voice calm as always. "Very well. Thank you, Maestro," she said softly. "I still can't believe it happened." He smiled gently. "Believe it, Elena, you've earned it. But now comes the harder part." She looked at him curiously. "Harder part? Success is not a destination," he said. "It's a beginning. The world has noticed you. Now you must decide what kind of musician you want to become." His words stayed in her mind long after she left the room. For the first time, she realized that fame wasn't the goal, music was. Over the next few months, her life became a balance of learning, performing, and understanding herself as an artist. Invitations started coming in. Small local performances, interviews, collaborations with other students. Every performance brought new faces, new challenges, and new lessons, but no matter how far she went, she always remembered where it all began. That broken piano at home and the tiny living room where she first dreamed of music. One weekend, she took the train back home to visit her parents. When she walked into the house, the same piano still stood in the corner, covered in dust. She ran her fingers over the old silent keys and smiled. Her father came out from the kitchen surprised. "You're home early." "I miss this place," she said. "And I miss this old piano." Her mother joined them, her eyes soft. "You've grown so much," she said. "Everyone in town is talking about you. We're so proud." That night, Elena sat down at the broken piano and started to play gently. Even though half the notes didn't sound right, she still felt the same warmth as before. Her parents stood in the doorway, listening quietly. For them, this was not just music. It was their daughter's soul speaking through every note. When she returned to the city, she found a new kind of peace. The maestro continued to guide her, but now their lessons were different. He didn't just teach her technique. He taught her philosophy. Music, he said one afternoon, is not about perfection. It's about truth. You can play every note perfectly and still say nothing, but one imperfect note played with emotion can move hearts. Elena listened carefully. "Then how do I find my truth in music?" she asked. The maestro smiled. "By living, by feeling, by remembering where you came from." Those words hit her deeply. She realized she didn't just want to sound good. She wanted her music to mean something. She wanted it to tell her story and touch others who felt unseen, unheard, or underestimated. She began writing her own compositions, small pieces at first. The maestro encouraged her. "Write what you feel, not what others expect," he said. Her first piece was inspired by her journey, the long nights of practice, the doubts, the hope, and the faith that kept her going. When she played it for the maestro, he closed his eyes and listened without saying a word. When she finished, he simply said, "This is you. Don't lose this voice." Word about her original music spread quickly. People said her compositions had a soul of their own, soft but strong, full of emotion yet simple enough for anyone to understand. Soon, a well-known music producer who attended one of her small performances approached her. "Your music is pure," he said. "Would you be interested in recording a few pieces for a charity concert?" Elena was nervous but agreed. It wasn't about fame. It was about sharing her story through music. The concert was organized to raise funds for underprivileged children who couldn't afford instruments or lessons. When she stood on that stage, surrounded by young faces full of hope, she felt a lump in her throat. Before playing, she spoke for a moment. "I grew up with a piano that had broken keys," she said softly. "People told me I couldn't play. But I learned that you don't need perfect keys to make music. You just need belief. So if you have a dream, don't let anyone tell you that you can't reach it." The audience clapped warmly. When she began to play, the hall grew quiet. Her melody floated through the air, full of tenderness and strength, telling a story that words never could. When the performance ended, there were tears in the eyes of many people, including the maestro, who watched proudly from the front row. After the concert, a young boy approached her shyly. He looked about 10 years old and held a small plastic keyboard under his arm. "Miss Elena," he said, "I saw you on TV once. My piano's broken too, but I still play. My mom says maybe one day I'll play like you." Elena knelt down to his level and smiled. "You don't need a perfect piano," she said gently. "Just promise me you'll never stop playing." The boy nodded eagerly, and she patted his shoulder before standing. That small moment meant more to her than any award could. She realized that her music had begun to inspire others, and that was the real gift. But even as success surrounded her, Elena never let it change who she was. She still practiced late at night, still called her parents every week, still remembered the sound of rain on the roof while she played her first melody. The maestro often reminded her, "Fame fades, but art remains." One afternoon, he called her to his home. His health had been weakening lately, and he moved more slowly than before. "I have something for you," he said, handing her an old notebook filled with handwritten notes and music sheets. "These are pieces I never finished. I want you to complete them." Elena looked at him in surprise. "Me? But Maestro, these are your works." He smiled gently. "They will only live if someone carries them forward." "I trust you." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't know what to say. Just promise me one thing," he said softly. "Promise me you'll never stop playing from the heart, no matter where life takes you." She nodded, unable to speak. That evening, she sat alone at the piano, the maestro's unfinished notes in front of her. Slowly, she began to play, filling the spaces between his notes with her own. The music felt like a conversation, between a teacher and his student, between past and future. In that moment, she understood something deeper. Music wasn't just about sound. It was about connection, from one heart to another, from one generation to the next. Months later, she completed the piece and performed it in honor of the maestro. It was called Echoes of the Heart. When she played the final note, she looked up and saw people in the audience wiping their tears. She smiled softly, knowing the maestro would have been proud. Her journey had started with broken keys, but now her music touched hearts across the country. And still, every time she played, she felt that same spark she had felt as a little girl, sitting by the window, believing in a sound only she could hear. Elena had discovered the secret her maestro had always known. True music doesn't come from the hands. It comes from the heart. Months turned into years, and Elena's name slowly began to spread beyond the walls of the conservatory. People talked about her music in small cafes, in classrooms, and even on radio shows. She wasn't the kind of artist who chased fame, but somehow, her sincerity drew people in. Her music spoke the language of feeling, pure, gentle, and honest. Still, she never let success get to her head. She lived a simple life, spending most of her days teaching, composing, and visiting children in music schools. Whenever she looked at a child struggling with an instrument, she saw a reflection of her younger self, the girl who had learned to dream with broken keys. The maestro's health had declined over time. He no longer conducted, but he continued to teach a few students privately. Elena often visited him at his small house near the conservatory. They would sit by the window, talk about music, and share tea. One evening, as the sun painted the sky with orange light, he said softly, "I watched your last concert on television." "You've grown beyond my expectations," she smiled. "Everything I am is because you believed in me." He shook his head gently. "No, my dear. You believed in yourself. I only reminded you of what you already had." A silence settled between them, full of warmth and gratitude. Then he added, "I won't be here forever, Elena. But remember what I told you. True music never dies. When I'm gone, play not to remember me, but to continue the voice of every teacher, every soul who came before you." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I promise." A few months later, the maestro passed away peacefully. The news spread quickly across the music world. People mourned, concerts were held in his memory, and musicians everywhere played pieces he had written. Elena attended his funeral quietly, standing among his students and admirers. When the ceremony ended, she stayed behind for a while, looking at the flowers placed beside his portrait. She whispered softly, "Thank you for hearing me when no one else did." That night she sat alone at her piano. The room was dark except for a small lamp beside her. Her fingers rested on the keys, but she didn't play at first. She just sat there thinking about the journey, from her small home to this moment. When she finally began to play, the melody that came out was gentle and full of emotion. It was the same piece she had finished for him, Echoes of the Heart. As the notes filled the air, she could almost feel his presence beside her, listening quietly just like he used to. The following year, Elena received an invitation from the National Philharmonic Hall again, the same place where her life had changed years ago. This time the concert was special. It was a tribute to Maestro Reinhardt's legacy, and they wanted her to perform the closing piece. When she read the letter, she sat in silence for a long time. Her heart felt heavy but also full of purpose. She knew this was not just another concert. It was a way to honor the man who had believed in her when the world hadn't. She accepted the invitation without hesitation. In the weeks that followed, she prepared for the performance carefully. She chose not to play a famous composer's work, but to perform her own piece, one she had been writing for months, inspired by everything she had lived and learned. She called it The Song of the Unheard. It was a story in music form, about struggle, hope, belief, and the courage to follow one's heart even when no one else understands. Each day, she practiced late into the night, sometimes closing her eyes and imagining her younger self sitting beside her, smiling with wonder. As the concert day approached, the hall was filled with excitement. Musicians from around the country gathered. The posters outside showed her name in bold letters, something she still couldn't get used to. On the evening of the concert, as she stood backstage, she looked out through the curtain. The hall was full, every seat taken. Among the crowd were students, teachers, old friends, and even her parents sitting proudly in the front row. Her father was wearing his best suit and her mother held a handkerchief tightly in her lap. The conductor introduced her to the audience. Tonight, we close with a performance by someone who represents the spirit of our late Maestro, a musician who reminds us that greatness can grow from the humblest beginnings. The applause began even before she stepped onto the stage. Elena took a deep breath, placed her hand over her heart and walked toward the piano. The same grand piano stood there shining under the soft lights. It was the same stage where, years ago, she had made the Maestro stand in awe. Now she was here again, not as a student, but as an artist who had found her own voice. She sat down and took a moment to breathe. The hall went silent. You could almost hear the heartbeat of the audience waiting. Then she began to play. The opening notes were soft, almost like a whisper. The melody told of a little girl sitting by a broken piano, dreaming of sounds she couldn't yet play. It told of laughter, doubt, and the long nights of quiet determination. As the music grew stronger, it carried the feeling of hope, the moment when faith overcomes fear. Every part of her story lived inside that piece. The struggle, the courage, the people who helped her, and the ones who tried to stop her. The audience listened without moving. Some closed their eyes. Some wiped tears from their cheeks. When the final note rang out, it hung in the air for a long moment, fragile, beautiful, and full of emotion. Then came the applause. It began softly, then grew louder and louder until the entire hall was on its feet. Elena stood and bowed deeply, tears in her eyes. For a moment she looked up at the ceiling, as if she could see the Maestro watching from somewhere beyond, smiling in quiet pride. After the concert, as she walked off stage, her parents met her backstage. Her mother hugged her tightly, whispering, "You did it, my girl. You really did it." Her father's voice trembled as he said, "You made the Maestro proud, and you made us proud too." Elena smiled through her tears. "He's the reason I believed I could do this," she said softly. That night, as she sat alone in her dressing room, she looked at the old handkerchief her mother had given her years ago for luck. She placed it on the piano and smiled. The journey that had started with a broken instrument had led her here, to a stage filled with light, applause, and love. But she knew, deep down, this was not the end. A few weeks later, she started a small music foundation in her Maestro's name. Its purpose was simple: to give children from small towns and poor families access to instruments and lessons. She wanted every child who dreamed of music to have the chance she never had. At the opening ceremony, she spoke to a room full of young students holding violins, guitars, and small keyboards. "Don't be afraid of where you start," she told them. "You might not have the best instrument or the best teacher right now, but if you believe in your heart, music will find a way." Her words touched everyone in the room. Some of the children smiled shyly. Others looked inspired. After the event, she walked outside and looked up at the evening sky. It was calm, glowing with stars. Somewhere she felt the Maestro was still guiding her, not through words, but through the music that connected them. That night she went home and sat at her piano. For the first time in a long while, she played without planning or practicing, just feeling. The melody flowed naturally, peaceful and pure. She smiled as she played, whispering softly, "Thank you, old friend," as if speaking to her piano, to her past, and to everyone who had shaped her journey. And as the last note faded into the quiet of the night, she realized something beautiful. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about sharing something true. Elena had once been the girl no one believed in. Now she was the woman whose music touched hearts around the world. But more than that, she had become a voice for every dreamer who ever sat before something broken and believed they could still make it sing. And though the Maestro was gone, his words lived on. Every time her fingers touched the keys, every time a child smiled while learning, every time a song was born from courage instead of fear. In the end, Elena understood that the greatest stage wasn't made of lights or applause. It was made of people, hearts connected by music, listening to one another. And that was where her story truly began again. In every note, every dream, and every soul her music reached,